When a well-dressed stranger is mistaken for an intern on his first day, no one questions it, not even the team manager. But when the truth comes out, the office hierarchy is shaken, loyalties are tested, and every assumption is challenged. The office buzzed with the usual Monday morning chaos. Phones rang, keyboards clattered, and coffee-fueled conversations bounced off glass walls. At precisely 9:17 a.m. the elevator chimed, and out stepped a tall, sharply dressed man, mid-40s, dark brown skin, neatly cropped hair, wearing a tailored navy blue suit and oxblood leather shoes. His face was calm, unreadable, but his eyes scanned the room with quiet precision. As he entered the marketing floor of Halberton Media, a junior associate looked up from her desk. "You must be the new intern," she said, gesturing toward an unoccupied cubicle. The man gave a slow smile. "Sure," he replied, voice low and smooth, no correction, no name. Just then, Victoria Lennox, the team's project manager, a woman in her early 30s, pale skin, sharp bob-cut blonde hair, maroon blouse, and tight black slacks, rushed over, clearly flustered. "You're late. Interns arrive by 8:30. We'll talk about punctuality later." The man gave a polite nod and headed silently to the seat assigned to him. Behind those steady eyes was a decision. He would let the charade play out. Victoria Lennox ran her department like a drill sergeant in stilettos. Everything from the shade of the presentations to the font size of emails had to pass her approval. A perfectionist with no patience for small talk, she had earned her authority, but also a reputation for being intimidating. She glanced at the intern, her blue eyes narrowing. "You'll be shadowing Fiona this week," she said. Fiona, a 26-year-old copywriter with light brown skin, freckles, and curly auburn hair, gave a sheepish smile. "Hi, I guess I'm your tour guide," she joked. The man nodded again. No introduction, no title. To the rest of the team he was just a quiet observer. Helpful, yes, but unnecessary. Victoria, watching from her glass office, took it as indifference. "Another entitled Gen Z intern," she muttered to herself. The irony was delicious. The man watching everything was more experienced than any of them combined. What none of them knew, what he deliberately kept hidden, was that he wasn't there to be mentored. He was there to make decisions that would change the structure of their department. Throughout the day the man said very little. He watched, listened, and helped where asked. He fetched coffee, organized file folders, even joined a brainstorming session. At every turn people spoke freely around him, as they would with someone they believed irrelevant. Fiona chattered while showing him the content pipeline. "Victoria's a nightmare when she's stressed. But don't worry, she always forgets the interns' names after a week." She paused. "What's yours again?" The man smiled. "Marcus," he said softly. A lie. His real name was Jonathan Parrish, and he was the new executive vice president of strategy. He had taken a radical approach, immersing himself anonymously in one of the company's most dysfunctional departments to evaluate its leadership and culture firsthand. Every comment, every joke, every dismissal was a data point. A young male designer openly mocked client briefs. Another complained about Victoria's control freak tendencies. No one noticed Marcus's quiet gaze cataloging every reaction. Victoria thrived on being needed. She swooped into meetings with clipboards, made last-minute changes, and rejected pitches with casual cruelty. When Marcus offered a thoughtful suggestion during a meeting, one that clearly elevated the concept, she dismissed it without hesitation. "This isn't college. We don't need idealism. We need delivery," she snapped, not even looking up from her notepad. Marcus didn't react. He simply leaned back, folding his hands. After the meeting, she whispered to another team lead, "Interns always think they know better. He won't last 2 weeks." But something had shifted. A few team members, particularly Fiona, began to notice that Marcus wasn't like the previous interns. He was deliberate, insightful. His ideas were bold but grounded. Even so, Victoria's perception remained anchored. Power and identity had fused in her mind. Authority came with title, not substance, and Marcus was counting on that. The week wore on, and Marcus began quietly testing the dynamics. He asked Fiona how content decisions were made, prompting her to reveal Victoria's bottleneck habits. He observed how lower-level employees deferred even in informal settings, speaking with guarded tones when Victoria entered the room. During lunch, Marcus sat with the interns. He asked questions. "Who do you think makes the best decisions here?" The answers varied, but one theme emerged. Fear of speaking up. "If you question Victoria, you're invisible by the next day," someone whispered. Meanwhile, Victoria continued her campaign of control. She handed Marcus a stack of folders and said, "I expect these summarized by 5 p.m. That's what interns are for." He accepted them without a word. Back at his temporary desk, Marcus typed up detailed notes. Not summaries, but an in-depth analysis of workflow inefficiencies and internal politics. He sent the file to his private email. The report was growing. He wasn't just observing anymore. He was preparing. By Thursday, small inconsistencies began surfacing, tiny cracks in Marcus's intern persona. Fiona noticed how fluently he navigated corporate jargon, far more confidently than any junior hire. During a budget discussion, he effortlessly referenced media buying metrics and campaign life cycles that typically took years to master. "You said you were fresh out of a strategy program," Fiona asked casually. Marcus gave a half-smile. "Something like that." She narrowed her eyes slightly, but didn't push. Meanwhile, Victoria remained fully entrenched in her own version of reality. She had grown comfortable with Marcus's silence, mistaking it for submissiveness. She even took pride in mentoring him, often by condescendingly pointing out his so-called errors in front of the team. "He may learn eventually," she said aloud in a meeting, not even facing him. "But some instincts just can't be taught." Marcus didn't flinch, but inside the clock was ticking. The report he was building was nearly complete, and it wasn't just about inefficiency, it was about culture. A culture of fear, of ego, of blind assumptions. He didn't come to fire anyone. He came to shine a light. That afternoon, Marcus overheard two junior designers whispering in the hallway near the break room. "Did you see how Victoria dismissed his idea again?" one said. "It was actually brilliant. He's just an intern. She doesn't care." But what if he's not? The question lingered in the air. The gossip began spreading quietly through the team. People noticed the way Marcus carried himself, the way he never sought approval, yet always contributed value. Something didn't quite add up. Victoria remained oblivious. That evening she reprimanded Marcus for not double-stapling a printout, something she claimed was basic protocol. She used it as an excuse to lecture the entire team about standards. Her voice was loud, her words sharp. But Marcus stood still, calm, and completely unbothered. As people shuffled out of the room, Fiona leaned in and whispered, "I don't know who you really are, but I'm glad you're here." It was the first time anyone acknowledged the obvious. There was something different about him, and the moment of revelation was coming fast. Friday morning arrived with unusual energy. Marcus had barely slept, staying up late to finalize his internal review. Every observation, every imbalance in power, every example of leadership failure, documented. It wasn't about revenge, it was about clarity. Before heading in, he sent the file directly to the CEO's office under his actual name. Jonathan Parrish, Executive Vice President, Strategy and Organizational Renewal. The subject line was simple. Live Assessment Marketing Department. He walked into the building like every day before, same quiet demeanor, same calm expression. No fanfare, just observation. Victoria, in contrast, was in a mood. A client had questioned her latest campaign proposal, and she was looking for someone to blame. She stormed through the office, her heels clicking like gunshots, barking orders. "You," she snapped at Marcus. "Did you revise the mock-up like I told you?" "No," he said softly but clearly. Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me, I wasn't asked to," he replied. A flicker of confusion passed across her face. Something had shifted in his tone. For the first time, he wasn't playing the part. At noon, a company-wide email was sent out from the CEO's office. Urgent. Leadership review results and department visit today, 2 p.m. Murmurs swept through the building. No one knew what it meant. At 1:45 p.m., Marcus stepped into the conference room. Victoria rolled her eyes. "This doesn't concern interns," she said, waving him away. But then the CEO walked in, followed by two board members. And they greeted Marcus. "Jonathan," the CEO said warmly, "thank you for the detailed analysis. Your insights have been incredibly valuable." The room fell silent. Several jaws dropped. Victoria's face turned pale. "Jonathan," she repeated, blinking. "You're Executive Vice President," he said, standing calmly. "I've spent the last 5 days embedded here to observe firsthand how this department functions." The silence turned to shock. Some whispered apologies under their breath. Others looked away, ashamed. Victoria stumbled back a step, her voice trembling. I didn't know, that was the point," he said gently but firmly. The meeting that followed wasn't about punishment, it was about truth. Jonathan opened the floor to honest feedback. Now that the veil had lifted, people spoke freely. They shared how leadership often dismissed contributions, how fear stifled creativity, how assumptions dictated status. Jonathan addressed them with compassion but unwavering clarity. When a title becomes more important than a voice, we lose innovation. When we confuse arrogance with leadership, we silence growth. He didn't single out Victoria. He didn't need to. Her behavior had spoken for itself. She, to her credit, remained quiet, no longer towering with confidence. This was not humiliation, it was revelation, and it forced her to see herself from the outside. By the end of the meeting, roles and responsibilities were up for review. Jonathan promised restructuring, not just in workflow but in mindset. As the team slowly left the room stunned and thoughtful, Fiona approached him. "You could have embarrassed everyone, but you didn't." "I'm not here to punish people," he replied. "I'm here to make sure the next intern gets heard." The real work was only beginning. The office was a different place the following Monday. The usual buzz of chatter was subdued, replaced with introspective silence. People avoided eye contact, not out of guilt but contemplation. The revelation of Marcus's true identity had jolted the team into reevaluating how they viewed status, authority, and value. Victoria sat in her glass office, blinds open, unusually still. She hadn't spoken much since the meeting. Her posture was less rigid, her eyes less sharp. She watched her team like an outsider, as though seeing them for the first time. Fiona walked over to Jonathan's new office, a corner space previously vacant for executive expansion. She knocked gently. "You settled in." He looked up from his laptop. "Almost. I wanted to thank you again, not just for what you revealed, but how you did it." Jonathan leaned back, folding his hands. "There's no point in exposing a broken system if you're not willing to fix it with the people in it." That was the essence of his mission. He wasn't here to replace Victoria or destroy reputations. He was here to show how fragile assumptions could be, and how powerful transformation becomes when it's rooted in honesty. For the first time in years, Victoria felt vulnerable. The facade she had built, of unshakable control, flawless command, and intellectual superiority, had cracked. She couldn't deny the truth. Her behavior had been shaped more by insecurity than confidence. She sat at her desk long after everyone else had left that evening, replaying her conversations with Marcus, no, Jonathan, the time she dismissed his ideas, the way she spoke about him to others. Her voice, once so proud, now sounded hollow in memory. It wasn't the deception that hurt her pride, it was the fact that she hadn't seen his value until it came with a title. She opened a new document on her laptop. Title: Internal Practices Review. Proposed reforms. For the first time, she started writing with humility. Maybe her role wasn't about control, it was about cultivating trust. She didn't know what the future held for her at Halberton Media. But if she was going to stay, she had to rebuild, not her authority, but her humanity. The culture in the office began to shift. Jonathan made it clear status would no longer dictate who got to speak first. He implemented weekly feedback meetings where all voices were encouraged. He assigned reverse mentoring sessions, pairing interns with senior managers to exchange insight. At first, the change was met with skepticism. Old habits didn't disappear overnight, but slowly the atmosphere began to evolve. Fiona noticed her ideas were taken more seriously. Designers who once stayed silent now offered bold concepts. Even Victoria started listening, really listening. One afternoon, Victoria approached Fiona and said, "You were right about the campaign angle last month. I should have taken your input more seriously." Fiona blinked in surprise. "Thank you." It was a small moment, but significant. Jonathan watched from across the room, quietly pleased. He hadn't just flipped the hierarchy, he had encouraged empathy, and that was far more sustainable than a reshuffle of roles. Word of the intern reveal spread through Halberton Media like wildfire. Other departments were curious, some incredulous, others inspired. The company newsletter even published a spotlight on adaptive leadership, referencing Jonathan's experiment without naming names. It sparked broader questions. How many other departments were stifled by hidden hierarchies? How often were ideas ignored because they came from the wrong email address or cubicle? The HR department reached out to Jonathan, asking for a formal breakdown of his approach. His field experiment had become a case study, but Jonathan wasn't chasing fame or applause. He had one goal: make systems more human. Not just efficient but kind. He reviewed a message from an intern in the tech team. "I heard what you did in marketing. Thank you. I feel less invisible now." That single line validated everything. Weeks passed, and the department began to thrive. Campaign performance improved, not because of more oversight, but because people felt free to contribute. Innovation wasn't coming from the top, it was coming from everyone. Victoria stepped into Jonathan's office one morning. "Can we talk?" He nodded. "I want to keep leading this team," she said, hands folded, voice calm. "But I want to lead it better." Jonathan didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Then let's rebuild it together." There were no grand speeches, no promises of perfection, just an agreement to move forward differently. Jonathan looked out the window afterward, reflecting on the journey. Letting people believe he was an intern had revealed more than memos ever could. It had stripped away the masks people wore around power. Sometimes the best way to lead is to go unheard until you're truly ready to be listened to. 3 months after the reveal, the marketing team at Halberton Media looked and felt like an entirely new environment. The change wasn't dramatic on the surface. Desks were still cluttered with campaign boards. Phones still rang nonstop. But the energy had shifted. Meetings no longer revolved solely around Victoria. Jonathan made sure that each department member had a moment to speak. Fiona, once hesitant to offer ideas, now led her own campaign team. Even the interns, often rotated in every quarter, were welcomed with genuine mentorship rather than silent condescension. Jonathan had restructured the team around collaborative leadership. No more top-down echo chambers, he'd said. Brilliance doesn't care about your title. Victoria, who once saw challenges as threats, now viewed them as opportunities to grow. She held regular one-on-one sessions with junior staff, asking for feedback and sometimes genuinely apologizing. The transformation wasn't just in productivity. People were happier. Engagement went up. So did retention. The mistaken identity that began with a quiet man in a tailored navy suit had sparked a culture of listening, and that was far more powerful than anything printed on a business card. Word of the change in marketing spread to the executive suite, prompting the CEO to authorize a company-wide cultural audit. Jonathan was asked to develop a training series, Perception versus Value, Rethinking Hierarchy, for all senior management. He delivered his first presentation not in the boardroom but in the open-air conference atrium, surrounded by employees of every level. He stood in front of the group not as an untouchable executive, but as the former intern who had listened before speaking. "Every one of you has had your voice ignored at some point," he said. "And every one of you has likely ignored someone else. I'm not here to blame you. I'm here to ask what you'll do differently now that you know how that feels." The room was silent. Then came a ripple of nods. A few people took notes. A few more sat in thoughtful stillness. Jonathan wasn't trying to build a legacy. He was trying to break a cycle. And with every honest conversation that followed, he knew it was working. Victoria Lennox surprised everyone when she voluntarily stepped down from her managerial role 6 months later. Not in disgrace, but in growth, she accepted a new position in internal communications where she helped train department heads on how to build inclusive, collaborative teams. "I never thought I'd leave marketing," she told Jonathan during one of their regular coffee chats. "But I realized I wasn't building things, I was controlling them." Jonathan nodded. "And now," she smiled, "now I'm listening, really listening." For the first time in years, her humility won her more respect than her authority ever had. Her departure from leadership wasn't a fall from grace, it was an intentional evolution. And people took notice. Interns who once feared her now invited her to brainstorms. Younger team members sought her feedback, not because they had to, but because they wanted her insight. It was proof that identity wasn't fixed, it could be reshaped, if one dared to see themselves honestly. On a quiet Friday morning, Jonathan drafted a final internal memo before taking a short sabbatical. The subject, Truth in Perception, it read, "We are not our titles, we are not our resumes. We are the way we treat people when no one's watching. Let that define your leadership. Let that define your team. Let that define this company." JP hit send. Then he walked the halls of the office one last time before his break. Not as a vice president, not as the intern, but as a person who had changed something quietly, effectively, and humanely. Employees smiled as he passed. Some nodded in gratitude. Fiona waved from the creative lounge. Victoria, now mentoring a new group of junior execs, gave him a respectful smile. There were no fireworks, just transformation, the kind that sticks. Back when he first stepped out of that elevator in a navy blue suit, no one knew what to make of Jonathan Parrish. They saw an outsider, an intern, a nobody, but what they learned, what we all must learn, is that status is fragile and assumptions are dangerous. Because the quietest voice might be the one writing your future. The invisible presence might be the one shaping your tomorrow. And sometimes the most powerful thing a leader can do is become invisible just long enough to see the truth. So the next time someone walks into your world without a title, without a name you recognize, ask yourself, what would you see if you weren't looking at their badge? And what might you miss if you were? If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think differently about leadership, identity, or power, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Let's keep questioning assumptions together.